We're live.
One.
Okay,
Great.
Steve.
Michelle, you want to start?
Can you hear me okay, Steve? All right, great. Well, welcome everybody to our second working group session for the HART TOD pilot project. My name is Michelle Zender. I'm a planner with HDR, and I'll be serving as host for today's call. Go to the next slide, please. I'll kick us off with a quick review of our agenda.
Michelle?
First, we'll go over some quick WebEx meeting logistics so people understand the way, if you're not familiar, how it works. Then Nicole McCleary with HART will give a brief introduction of the project. Steve Shoecroft with HDR will give an overview of the early observations that we found during our context assessment. Following that, we'll open up the conversation to the group to get feedback on issues and opportunities important to you and your community. And finally, we'll talk about next steps and close out the meeting. Next slide. So quickly, we just wanted to go over a couple things. The chat button can be found at the bottom of your WebEx screen. There should be a little speech bubble down there that you can click, and your chat panel will show up on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be tracking that for any comments that might come in throughout the presentation. And we ask you to please go on mute if you're not talking, to avoid background noise. And actually, I might do an all mute right after this just to ensure that, but you can unmute yourself if you have a question. If you're having any trouble during the session with your computer video or audio, you can always join the meeting on your phone, and there's call-in info on the meeting invite for that. And if you just have any general trouble throughout, you can email me, and my email address is right there on the screen. So with that, I will pass it to Nicole for an introduction to the project.
Thanks, Michelle. First of all, I want to say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you guys for attending the second working group for the TOD project. My name is Nicole McCleary. I'm a senior planner with HART, and I am the deputy project manager of the TOD project. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share with you guys the project team. So our sponsors for the study are HART, the City of Tampa, Hillsborough MPO, Hillsborough County, and then the Planning Commission as well. So within the working group, we have neighborhood representatives. We also have major property owners and developers, and then institutions that are located within the study area. We have a fabulous consultant team that's being headed up by HDR, and it includes SB Friedman, Placerbia, Street Sense, Playbook, and Vrana Consulting. So one thing to know is that this project was funded from a grant through FTA for a pilot program, and we're really excited about it. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to refresh everyone about what the TOD working group is. So the purpose of this group is really to provide a sounding board and to get feedback on the direction that we're headed in with the project. We want to hear your ideas, what you think will work and what won't work. We also want feedback on what we found if you think that they align. So this group is a non-voting body and it's informal. The group size may change as we continue to work through the project because it is still open to other people as people learn about the project and get more interested in the project. They are definitely welcome to join. So as I said, we have various types of membership. within this working group, but they are really invested in the study area. So for meetings, this is our second working group meeting. We're going to host them every two months throughout the term of the study. So the study is 18 months, so throughout the next year. They'll definitely be led by HART and our consultant team. We'll announce them on the website. We'll also send out emails to let you guys know. And as I said before, it's still open to other participants. Next slide, please. So with that, I will turn you over to Steve Shoecraft from HDR. He's going to give you a project briefing and get you guys up to date on what we've been doing since our last meeting.
Thanks, Nicole. So this is the consistent with the FTA grant, and it was a competitive grant process. So HART and the team competed against communities around the country to bring those resources to Tampa. To look at conditions along the HART arterial BRT corridor and the streetcar extension corridor. So this is looking at the future of the communities along the corridor, trying to identify TOD potentials and opportunities, and look at ways to transform conditions, but also conserve the qualities that people appreciate and enjoy in the surrounding neighborhoods. The goals relate to both land use and mobility. So the transit-oriented development is really about encouraging a diverse and dense mix of transit-supportive uses, housing, workplaces, shops, and supportive services. We're looking at ways that also protect and improve community character, livability, and resilience. So, in many cases, the potential for commercial development is limited to the frontage of the corridor, and that transitions very quickly into neighborhoods. So we're not looking to drastically change the character of those surrounding neighborhoods, but we are looking for ways to improve those conditions. We're looking to create complete, safe, walkable, and bikeable street networks. Every transit trip ends with a walk trip and possibly a bike trip. So we're looking at how people connect to these new services. And the quality of that connection is really important to improve accessibility and improve regional connectivity. We're looking at strategies, policies, and regulations to encourage context-sensitive buildings and improvements to public spaces, and broadly with the access to transit, improved access to transit, improve accessibility to local and regional destinations. So as Nicole mentioned, it's an 18-month effort. It's organized into these three primary phases on the right side of the screen: the context assessment, development of policies and strategies, and then drilling into a higher level of detail of analysis of the Palm Avenue station area. That's the northernmost stop on the streetcar extension, and that's the point of interface between the HART arterial BRT project and the streetcar project. So we'll be looking at conditions in a greater level of detail within a half mile of that stop location. So we're still relatively early in the study. We were sort of working through negotiations as the pandemic hit. We went through some rework to focus resources to online and virtual engagement, which is the working group is part of that process. But we've developed a website to post information about the project and use that as a tool to allow people to access information and learn more about the study. We've held a series of listening sessions with key stakeholders. Turnout for some of those wasn't fabulous, so that was what generated the idea for the working group. So instead of trying to reach out individually or in small groups, we figured we'd create a broader group and have a more consistent point of check-in with that group. So that's where we've been in the study. So we're in deep into the context assessment phase, which is our research phase of the study. The research is organized to try to better understand what transit-oriented development means for the future of communities. So we throw around the term transit-oriented development and TOD all the time. TOD is shorthand for transit-oriented development. And fundamentally, those are kinds of places that are designed to capitalize on access to enhanced public transportation. So those are the kinds of places that benefit from the availability of transportation, public transportation, and improved regional accessibility. But also, that development benefits the transit service. So it builds the base for ridership for the system to justify the expense for the improvement. So it's a really tight connection between the transit investment and the development of the communities along the corridor. This is a bit of a repeat of what we talked about in the first working group meeting, but the successful TODs share some really fundamental qualities. Walkability and connectivity is really fundamental to a TOD's success. So access to transit, but also access to destinations within the footprint of the TOD is really critical. And we talk a lot about the distance or the time of access to the transit stop or station. So we talk about a 5 to 10 minute walk distance as the optimal distance. And that's the area that's typically influenced from a market perspective and a livability perspective by the transit investment. So our focus is within that walk distance, within a half mile of the stop locations proposed along the corridor. And we'll talk more about how that defines the study area. But those are the places that benefit from the transit, but they're the places that that generate ridership for the system. We'll talk a lot about density and diversity. So we're looking at, fundamentally, we're looking at ways to make places more walkable and less dependent on private automobiles for local and regional accessibility. So walkability and bikeability are really fundamental qualities of a successful TOD. We're also looking for a diversity of uses so you can meet your daily needs by walking, biking, and transit rather than using an individual car. So it's the strategy from a regional perspective helps reduce overall the vehicle miles traveled generated by development, limits the demand for parking at destinations across the system, and again, it helps allow for possibly lower total housing and transportation costs for the folks that live within TOD. So TOD is also designed to support and serve emerging markets. So as we're thinking about who's going to live in this region over the next 20 years, it's likely from a demographic standpoint to be smaller households, more diverse households, less of your sort of traditional nuclear family households. And so we're looking to provide housing options and services to support a much more diverse community. The TOD itself, TODs, the transit-oriented places or transit-supportive developments support enhanced transit service. So it helps justify the public investment in the transit service because you're providing those benefits broadly to the community and to the region. And then we look at the design, the quality of buildings, public spaces, streets, and streetscapes to be very context responsive. So in this case, we're not looking at drastic changes to existing communities. We're looking to fit new uses and new activity in a context, in an existing context. So context sensitivity, context responsiveness is really important. So the study areas, we talk more about this. We'll talk about it as the study area or the corridor with sub-areas. It's defined by the proposed alignment for the Tampa streetcar extension, which goes north through downtown along the Tampa Florida pairs up to Palm Avenue. And then the HART arterial BRT project goes from there north along the Florida Tampa pair, extends. Let me see if I can mark this up as I'm talking, if that's helpful. Maybe not. Let's see if it's working. That doesn't seem to be working. Okay, so north along Florida Avenue through Seminole Heights, there's a jog to go over to Nebraska, north on Nebraska, and I'll explain the rationale for that in a little bit, to Fowler, over Fowler, to Bruce B. Downs, and then up to the VA as the northern terminus. There's still some work that HART is doing to define stop locations along that corridor and the terminal locations to the north end and the south end, but the basic corridor is set, and you can see the spacing of the stops are relatively close together. So what we end up with is a corridor that virtually all of the neighborhoods along that corridor are within walking distance of a stop. The graphics show the darker orange is the quarter-mile or 5-minute walk distance from a stop measured along street center lines. So it's the actual physical walk distance. It's not the theoretical quarter-mile. And the lighter yellow is the half-mile distance. So you can see, given the existing relatively small-scale street grid network along the whole corridor, that most of the area within that half-mile, quarter-mile and half-mile distance is within walking distance of a stop. We also looked at sub-areas for the sake of our analysis, so we broke it down into these 5 parts: a downtown sub-area, Tampa Heights, Seminole Heights, the North Florida, Nebraska corridor, and then Fowler, USF. The sub-areas just help us for analytical purposes as we present the information that we've learned through the context assessment. There's some, kind of unique qualities about the different areas, and we'll talk about those more a little bit and dive a little bit deeper. It's important to understand the different qualities of those places as we start to think about policies and strategies. So as I mentioned, we're in the midst of developing the context assessment report. We've got a draft of that into HART for review now, so we'll be able to get that out to you all and make it publicly available over the next several weeks. That's the basic planning work to assess existing conditions. So it's looking at patterns of land use and development along the corridor, understanding market dynamics and the different market positions of properties and areas along the corridor, looking at the form of development, kind of assessing the how TOD oriented or TOD friendly or supportive different places are along the corridor, so we can understand better what needs to transform to create better transit supportive conditions. We're evaluating equity and affordability to understand how the project benefits or possibly disbenefits specific communities along the corridor. Affordability is a key piece of the puzzle. We have a specific scope item that looks at the supply and demand for various levels of affordable housing, and we'll be developing strategies to promote affordability, both a diversity of available housing and increase the supply of available housing, but look at specific methods to hold down the costs for folks along the corridor or to maintain the naturally occurring affordable housing that exists. And then we're pulling together, we're synthesizing the results of this now into some summary documents, and we're really focusing on where the TOD opportunities are along the corridor and how those opportunities change depending on their location. So clearly the TOD orientation is different in different places along the corridor. And what we have is, as a pilot project, we address almost all of the conditions typical along corridors throughout the Tampa Bay region, from traditional downtown conditions to early neighborhood main streets to mid-century main street conditions to auto-oriented community centers at different scales. The one type, so if you think about Hillsborough County overall, you can think about locations where there are mid-century Main Street neighborhood center conditions. You can think about where some of the older auto-oriented places are throughout the county and the regional centers. The one condition that we don't address in this corridor is more of the newer suburban master plan development. So if you think of the development pattern out toward Brandon and possibly South County, which is much larger footprint master plan communities, we would have a different strategy to try to reform those to become transit oriented. But we have the rest of the bases covered. So if you think about major corridors, if you think about crossing corridors like Hillsborough also represents sort of the history of development in the city with different scales of neighborhood Main Street, auto-oriented commercial to much larger footprint auto-oriented commercial. We're looking at the market conditions as well. So we think about that TOD orientation. We're also thinking about the market for TOD investment. And so we also have a wide range of conditions along the corridor. This map doesn't reflect that specifically. This is more of a placeholder right now. But we have some really strong locations for TOD investment that are already delivering TOD projects. If you think about most of the development that's occurred downtown, it's very walkable. It's oriented to the street. It's dense and diverse. It's got active ground floor uses. The downtown partnership with the city have worked hard over the last 10 years to look at the ground floor conditions of buildings to make sure that they promote walkability. Oh, Steve, you say, I think the slide may be frozen. Let me bump it to the next one. Let me know if that switches for you, Stephen. We may have an issue.
That works.
Okay, good. As we're starting to drill down into these opportunities, we're looking at how those opportunities are different and more diverse along the corridor. This map shows a little bit of that, so we're testing some graphics to see how we try to highlight where the opportunities exist. So this map shows, for example, the commercial and non-commercial land uses along the corridor with your darker color as commercial, lighter color as non-commercial. So that's residential and institutional and some other uses in the same category. And you can see that the footprint of the opportunity changes dramatically along the corridor, where downtown we've got that tight block structure, but we have several full blocks with development potential. In Tampa Heights and Seminole Heights, it's really just the frontage lots along Florida where our opportunities exist, and we'll start to think about how we fit infill and redevelopment on those properties. When we get north of the Hillsborough River, we have the large footprint shopping center sites. We've got the old dog track site. The potential redevelopment is really powerful in those locations, but the market's not proven yet. So that's another case where we've got a great opportunity, but we have a challenge. We had a question about the other opportunity that doesn't show up on this one is Robles Park Village. So that's a place where we've got a significant potential for change. The Housing Authority is looking into that opportunity for change now, and that's going to drive the future of the surrounding neighborhoods in significant ways. So we're really excited about the fact that that project is happening on a parallel track with this effort, and we can look at ways to ensure that or influence that project to make it as transit-oriented as we can. This next set of slides kind of walks through some early observations along the corridor from downtown up to USF. So what we're thinking about here is what's the context that we're trying to influence or change, the market position of properties, the existing TOD orientation, and that's starting to shape the way we're thinking about policy development. So clearly, conditions are vary greatly across the full corridor, and our strategies for downtown are going to be very different than they are from Tampa Heights and Seminole Heights, North Florida, and the Fowler USF area. So it's not won't in any way be a one-size-fits-all set of recommendations that we make. They're going to be targeted to the sub-area and then the kinds of development opportunities we've identified. So downtown is our traditional, the region's traditional center of activity. High levels of recent development. Water Street by itself is a nationally significant project with several million square feet getting ready to hit the market over the next 6 months with more development in the pipeline. And there's been other significant investment around downtown. The uptick in multifamily residential is really changing the character of downtown, the level of activity, the 18 and 24-hour nature of how downtown is being used now. With the Encore and other affordable housing projects, the opportunity to enjoy the transformation of downtown is available to a broader range of folks, and we're looking to build on that level of affordability and equity that those projects provide. So there's a high level of walkability and transit supportiveness, significant opportunities for TOD development, specifically just south of the downtown interchange. There's a lot of full block sites. Some are public controlled, some are private, but there's a lot of opportunity for change in that location specifically. And what we believe we'll be doing as we move into the recommendation is promoting continued intensification, streetscape improvements, incremental infill and redevelopment, adaptive reuse of some of the smaller properties that don't have on-site parking. So the work that's been done recently to inform parking policy could have a significant impact on the reuse of some of the smaller places, so it could reposition those locations or those buildings for reinvestment. So that parking management and regulation is a critical question for specifically for downtown's future, but it also influences the rest of the project. Tampa Heights is somewhat split between what happens south of Palm and what happens north of Palm. So south of Palm is a bit more like downtown. With the Heights project, the activity along North Franklin, some of the proposed and smaller scale infill that's happening to the east of Florida Avenue, we're starting to see that full district change. South of Palm, north of Palm, it becomes more of a neighborhood serving corridor, and we're also seeing some investment in those locations. To the north end, is the last bullet on the slide indicates, is the Roval Park Village site, so that redevelopment opportunity is really powerful for the community. And again, as I mentioned, that process is just getting underway by the Housing Authority, so we'll be meeting with them and talking about the relationship between the two studies. So there, in terms of the market position, it's clearly an emerging market. It's seeing a lot of investment. The Heights investment has sparked a lot of reinvestment in the neighborhood, so we're seeing a lot of infill, small-scale infill, incremental infill, and redevelopment in the neighborhoods. We've got a different sort of character, so we've got Main Street conditions along, focused on Franklin on the south end of the corridor with some missing pieces, but then to the north it goes more toward that, what we're calling the mid-century Main Street or neighborhood center character with some front parking, side parking, and rear parking, so it's a mix of activities when we get to the north of Palm Avenue. There are some significant clusters of vacant and underused property with important development potential, but not to the scale that we see much further north on the corridor. So Seminole Heights, similar to the north end of Tampa Heights, the emerging clusters of mixed-use activity with strong institutional anchors, sort of neighborhood-focused institutional anchors. Like the north end of Tampa Heights, a fragmented mix of neighborhood serving and auto-oriented uses. So you've got the older kind of legacy car lots, used car lots next to restaurants and shops and more car lots and auto repair. So the fragmented quality of the corridor is one of the challenges that we need to address. And the variability in setbacks and parking location creates for some challenges in thinking about how we establish some continuity and concentration of activity. There's fewer large-scale vacant and underutilized sites. The projects that have been developed are basically the end of blocks, the sort of legacy residential parcels that fronted Florida in the old days have been converted for other uses, but there's not a lot of large footprint opportunities in the full Seminole Heights area. And like Tampa Heights, strategies are going to be focused on incremental infill and redevelopment, trying to make sure that projects that are built follow the code provisions that exist now. So the Seminole Heights provides a lot of guidance for how things should occur, but we'd be looking to make some improvements to that, and also address questions about concerns we've heard about neighborhood infill and redevelopment, so that people are really concerned about conserving the character of the neighborhood, but also having destinations to, within easy access along the corridor. The North Florida, Nebraska corridor, this is where we've got kind of the weakest market conditions and almost universally poor TOD orientation. So this is when we shift north of the river and the development pattern becomes almost exclusively auto-oriented. Very poor walkability, poor connections between sidewalks and transit stops and destinations. So you have to fight your way across large parking lots to get where you want to go in most locations along the corridor. Much deeper building setbacks, little frontage continuity, little connectivity, cross-parcel connectivity. However, this is also the location that has several large underutilized sites that represent really important redevelopment opportunities that, if done right, could really change the character of portions of the corridor. So I wanted to elaborate on the reason HART changes course and jumps from Florida to Nebraska here is because north of the corridor is where the uses shift to the newer, larger footprint auto dealerships, which don't generate transit trips, don't benefit from transit service, and have seen significant recent investment and are unlikely to turn over from a market standpoint. Whereas on Nebraska, there is an opportunity for improvement along Nebraska. Nebraska is an interesting case on that stretch. That's as the historic route for US 41. There's some deeper sites along the corridor. They started as some of the old murder courts. So they were the camps in the 30s and 40s, and then they became motels, and then there's a number of mobile home parks. But those are large commercial sites in single ownership. So we would see those. We're seeing throughout the region, we're starting to see some older mobile home parks turn over. The ones in the best location and the potential for transit service and connectivity and this in-between location between USF and downtown could provide an incentive for some reuse of those properties. The concern, obviously, and we've got several housing advocates on the call, that's one of our existing naturally occurring affordable housing locations is the mobile home park. So if we lost those units, we'd be looking for strategies to replace those with affordable units elsewhere, so we don't have a net loss of affordability. The Dollar USF, and this is a qualified. I should have a big asterisk next to this one. Generally speaking, it's a weak market location. However, University Mall is kind of a unicorn within that context. So we haven't seen a lot of investment along that corridor. We've seen disinvestment actually since I went to school at USF a long, long time ago. But the University Mall is we're starting to see the first significant phases of redevelopment of that property. Very ambitious plans, seems well positioned to attract investment as sort of an adjunct to USF and support services for USF and the medical facilities around USF. So that's a big opportunity. But broadly, really poor TOD orientation. Deep setbacks, limited connectivity between parcels, poor pedestrian conditions, limited crossing opportunities. So we will need to drill into these proposed stop locations to make sure that we can get people to the stops, that we're improving the walkability and connectivity to those locations, and then starting to think about how those sites redevelop over time and the extent that it's possible to change them from purely auto-oriented to more walkable, more transit-oriented. So again, a location with several large underutilized sites in single ownership. And as the market changes, we want to provide guidance that they become more walkable and transit-oriented.
Hey, Steve. I think
Yes.
we have a question that kind of fits in with what we're talking about right now. So the question is from Matt Sienk, and I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Matt. But he said, based on density issues in some of these areas, what is the plan for getting city planning department to push for zoning changes to support density?
Well, so we have some city planning staff on the call and county staff. But let me answer the question. I mean, that's really what our job is to make initial recommendations about those changes, the nature and kinds of change that should be appropriate, and then that'll have to work its way through the public engagement process, the community oversight of this effort toward recommendations that would carry through the comprehensive plan. So policies and strategies for development, transit-oriented development, and the comprehensive plans for the city and county, and then zoning changes. So that's really kind of one of the fundamental aspects of this project is that we need to put those recommendations together and then vet it through you all as the working group, our study team, the general public, and then formalize the recommendations and push them up through the key decision makers at the city and county. So, and that's part of, so a subset of what we have here the comprehensive plan and zoning changes are fundamental to how we think about suburban retrofit at the north end of the corridor, about incremental infill and adaptive reuse in the center of the corridor, and continued urban development downtown. So the dimensions of recommendations that fall under these categories are comprehensive plan changes, zoning reform. Some of the zoning's in place in some locations. It needs a lot of work in other locations. And then incentives and other programs, support for existing programs, potential new programs and initiatives that support suburban retrofit, incremental infill and redevelopment, and downtown development. So economic development strategies, proposals to promote housing affordability. I see Sarah Combs is on the call, so, you know, support for organizations that deliver the kinds of projects that we want to see along the corridor. So elevating those groups, giving them the resources they need and the support they need to deliver their programs, because their programs support neighborhood improvement, and those neighborhoods benefit from transit accessibility. So we'd be looking at ways to not just planning and zoning, but other initiatives to help sort of build the ecosystem to support TOD across all the folks that are active in land use development and conservation along the corridor.
Steve, if I can jump in really quick. Speaking of Sarah Combs, she has a question that she'd like to ask.
Yes, thank you so much. I've been on these calls, and this is so helpful because it's drilling down into it and making it a little bit more specific to this route. And so my question is around transit accessibility. I see that your stop, the stop is at the VA, which really it's not inclusive of the university area community, which is the area that I'm specifically focused on. And if you can recall, a couple years ago, we got 2 of our bus stops taken away from specifically our community, causing extensive hardships in our community. There's also a circulator that I know that IP is working on that also doesn't go directly up into our community. So I think that you're leaving out the university area community residents out of this picture, and just wanted to see why it stopped there and didn't move further north up into the university area community.
Sure, and I'm sorry, Chris, were you going to try to jump on that one?
It's Nicole. Actually, Sarah,
Okay,
so I just wanted to say that this was stopping here because this is specific to the BRT route, but we do have some service modifications that are going to be in place in January, and there is actually a circulator in the USF area right on campus as well.
Right, but it still doesn't address the community that I'm speaking of. So, I mean, if you live on 143rd and 15th, there's no way that you can get these services here. So that's my question. That's my concern, is that we're leaving out a big population of the community, the university area community, which is, we're working really hard to put in sidewalks and lighting and make accessible for residents to be able to get transportation. And I think that stopping there and not allowing residents to be able to access this beautiful, wonderful, very, very, I'm sure, expensive development in this project seems like it would fall short.
Yeah, I actually just looked at the area, and you're correct. We currently do not have service there, but we are definitely open to looking at new areas of service. Right now, HART is under some tight financial restraints, but definitely in the future, that's something that we would look at.
We also had a question from Commissioner Overman about inclusionary zoning and affordable housing along the corridor. That's one of the important questions that we're going to start to puzzle through, is what are the mechanisms available to us under state law from a zoning standpoint to promote or require affordability. We're somewhat limited under state law, so that we're trying to figure out through some research and best practices what's available to us. There's sort of 2 ways to tackle the question of affordability. or like three ways, I'm sorry. One is protecting what's affordable now, so the naturally occurring affordable housing in the neighborhoods, trying to look at strategies to help conserve that, so we don't lose the availability of those units through gentrification. The second strategy is to increase the supply broadly, which is sort of the supply side or approach to it is, well, if we have more units on the market, then prices wouldn't increase substantially. But there's a need for a more diversity of units. Right now we have low-rise multifamily residential and single-family homes. We don't have a lot of the missing middle housing types represented along the corridor. Attached housing, garage apartments, different kinds of like fourplexes, sixplexes that are developed in an urban format. So we'll be looking at the diversity of available housing along the corridor. And then the third item is the specific financial mechanisms that hold the project affordable over time. So it's the LIHTC, the program for tax credits, if there's a specific investment, a public investment in a project that would allow for the project to be held affordable, or partners, community land trusts, CDCs, and others that would deliver the housing with constraints on escalation and costs for tenants. We'll be looking at a whole series of strategies to see what we can deliver along the corridor, and that those are really not necessarily corridor specific. Those can be applied across the city and across the county. So as we look at affordability, it's less focused on specific locations and more about the regulations, policy, strategies, and investments that can deliver projects. So that would be what we wanted to do is sort of get you oriented to the way that we've been looking at the project so far, what we've learned through the context assessment, and then kick off this discussion. So I see Commissioner Overman just sent a follow-up. So why don't we go ahead and tackle those questions, and then we'll open it up to the group. Commissioner Overman, I'm just reading your note. Do you want to jump on? I don't know if you're in a place where you can.
There may be noise in the background, but I'll do the best I can.
Great.
I have been looking at this significantly and trying to discern how to best accomplish the 54,000 affordable housing units we need in Hillsborough County, but also how to avoid missing, as we talk about transit forever and talk about affordable housing forever and talk about whether or not we actually do any zoning or what's available, where we end up losing the opportunity to do something about it because the speculators just go in and buy the properties from very low-income areas or areas that are in economic decline. That window is open right now. So if it takes us a year and a half to figure this out, we're not going to have a lot to work with. So I am looking at inclusionary zoning or partnering with the city, because much of this is actually in the city, partnering with the city and working together on identifying affordable housing overlays, and looking at our zoning codes to be able to identify opportunities to create mixed-use projects so that you have not only mixed use but mixed income. You mentioned, Steve, that in many of the lots on the Nebraska side or on the Fowler side, I assume, we're set way back from the street. There's lots of parking. It's hard to get to the street. It's not really that hard, but it's a walk from the building to the transit, which doesn't necessarily make it conducive for using the transit. But those footprints make it possible for a mixed-use project.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Combination of retail, combination of community services, combination of housing, and a mixed income housing, so that the neighborhoods that are in that area that have, a stake in the ground, as many of the heights have less of a fear, or the NIMBY factor does not raise its ugly head of bias that says, I don't want poor people moving next to me because they bring crime. And that's not fair, it's not right, but it happens. And if we have an overall area that is designated as a preference zone for those individuals that are building housing, whether it be single-family townhomes or high-rises, do it in such a way that they have expedited permitting and makes it easier for them to get the project done. We may be able to move forward on this, but my concern is if we're not really paying attention to that, the areas that you described north of Sly, I guess, there's or Waters, between Waters and Linebaugh, where it curves over. Yeah. You know, that area is very depressed. There's a lot of mobile homes there. There's a lot of areas ripe for redevelopment. And we can wait until it actually gets owned and speculated and raise the price before we do the zoning, but I think it would be wise to do it as quickly as possible. You had indicated that you thought that there was some difficulty with inclusionary zones. What do you believe is the difficulty?
This isn't research that I've worked through completely yet, but at the state level, my understanding is that there's limits on what a community can do with zoning as their primary tool to require the inclusion of affordable housing. You can deal with it as an incentive, but you can't straight up say X percent of any project will have to be set aside for some level of affordability.
There is some limits on it, but it does lay a platform for expectation. Doesn't mean you just don't get the other bennies. You don't get the density bonus. You don't get the expediting. There's several things that you don't get. And at one point in time, we as a county, and I think the city may have had the same problem, we have to make the developer whole for some of the costs associated with it, of doing unaffordable housing, a rental property in that particular area. And that is apparently no longer the case. So there actually are less barriers than we think there are. And I would really like to see that information be made available, because the process is critically important. And if we haven't figured that out in this opportunity, and how well it might work and lay out that pattern or template, it's going to be difficult to take advantage of what you learn in this process as HART's strategic growth plan, when it ever has the money, gets laid over in other areas of Hillsborough County, whether it be in the city or the county. So that was my concern, is how do we capitalize on what you're doing here and at least build a template for success when it comes to not only transit, urban development, redevelopment, and affordable housing. And I'll stop there.
No, and that's the next stage in the study, is to tackle that more directly. So we've got S.B. Friedman, our sub-consultant, has a slide deck that defines the challenges, existing supply and the challenges delivering affordability. And our next step is to start to develop the policies and strategies. And some of those are going to take, to a certain extent, public investment is going to be a key to delivering affordable projects. The city and county will need to partner with developers in some way. The zoning zoning by itself is kind of a coarse tool, so there's going to have to be more focus on partnering to get those projects underway. And we're not prepared for that conversation on today's call, but in the next call or the call after that, starting in the new year, we'll be focused. One of these calls will focus specifically on housing affordability, and we'll dive in much higher level detail. There's a couple other affordable housing advocates on the call. And I don't know if you'd want to share any thoughts as we're talking.
Steve, I'll just follow up with one comment there. in almost every single affordable housing project, there is a partnership between the government and the developer. So that is a good thing. I think that's sort of a given with any affordable housing project. There's very few of them that don't include government participation in some way, shape, or form. But I am interested in hearing from the other housing advocates on the call. Thank you.
Steve, if I could jump in real quick, this is Jeff Dickinson with SB Friedman to speak to a little bit to the same issue, and we will have a more robust discussion of this. But I think in other places, I've seen New Start's funding in Minneapolis. They're going to build a new line, and there was philanthropic activity aggressively out in front of that new rail line for the very reason that Commissioner Overman is talking. They were worried they were going to lose a bunch of existing affordable units, but they just bought them up. Like, they had to come up with the money and buy up affordable units and protect them, because that is the surest way and the fastest way and really the cheapest way, I think, to preserve affordable housing but it requires obviously a ginormous amount of philanthropic energy in that arena. So anyhow, that's another thought to think about, because all these zoning and all these other things are good levers, but they're not. We may need a huge switch, you know what I mean, rather than small levers, or in addition to small levers.
Let me. I'm trying. I apologize. I'm trying to read through the chat, and there's a lot in here, so I've got to absorb it. Ashan, did you want to share any thoughts? I know that this is your focus of your work, is to promote housing, address and educate and help promote delivery of affordable housing around the region. Do you want to jump in? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I already did, I guess.
Sure, I'll just say briefly, and I know you have an attorney on the line, but the new state law does allow for mandatory inclusionary. It really just kind of codifies what we already knew from case law about unfairly burdening property rights. So basically, just says that you have to make the developer whole, and the quickest way to get there is through density bonuses for providing the affordable units, combining with some other incentives. And, you can craft it any way you want. It can just be